you can get Sons of Patriarchy completely ad-free on Apple Podcasts for $4.99 per month or $44.99 per year. This applies to our entire back catalog and every upcoming episode completely ad-free. Listening without interruption. If you don't mind the ads, you can still listen to the series for free on any of your favorite podcast platforms. This revenue helps support Outreach Idaho and helps pay the bills of the series. Now, on to the episode. Quick announcement before we start this episode. We've launched our website and initial line of merch. Go to sonsofpatriarchy.com and pick up a t-shirt, a sticker, or a crew neck fleece, or all three. And wait till you see our design. We went bold. A link to the website is in our show notes, or simply type sonsofpatriarchy.com into your search bar. Now, on with today's conversation. So we got somebody coming about Trinity Classical Academy more specifically, and then some tangential aspects, mostly around teachers who are also not just members, but leaders at Christ Church Santa Clarita, and then other just crossovers, but more specifically in Trinity Classical Academy. So I'll ask you, first question, how did you first come to hear of TCA, the acronym TCA, Trinity Classical Academy, and what were your first impressions of the school?
Yeah, so we were first, we actually knew of Trinity Classical Academy way prior to having school age children. We were planted and rooted pretty heavily in the church, North Park Community Church, where Trinity Classical Academy rented the building from on the weekdays. So when our kiddos were little, we were surrounded by Trinity families. And when it came time to enroll our oldest into grammar school, we didn't even look at public school options or any other schools. We just kind of put in our application and felt like we kind of had our foot in the door. Mrs. Cato was a member of the church at the time, and so we knew her on a very friendly personal basis, and it just was like a natural selection for us to send our kids to Trinity. So in 2011, we enrolled our oldest into kindergarten. 2 years later, we enrolled our second into kindergarten. 2 years after that, we enrolled our third into kindergarten. And 4 years after that, we enrolled our youngest into TK. That was the fall going into COVID was when we enrolled our fourth. And I feel like that's important because that's kind of when everything went sideways. Not only with the pandemic in the world, but just sideways in my marriage, sideways in relationships and friendships. And I think that was kind of the turning point for us.
Gotcha. All right. And this your Mrs. Cato is Liz Cato, correct? The head of school.
Yes.
Okay. Has she always been head of school? Was she head of school when you were there? Or
Yes.
Early on in 2011?
She had always been the head of school. The turnover for us was principals and then
Okay.
um, some teachers, but she was always the head of school. I would even call her at that point a friend of ours. Like we were in close relationship. My husband did a lot of outside work on the campus. It was for the church at the time because it was prior to the school buying the church campus and property. But we were always on campus.
Okay. Got it. All right. So that's how you first heard of it, and the timeline of so you were. I mean, it is fair to say you were ensconced at TCA. I mean, all your kids went to TCA. I'm assuming you got to know Headmaster Cadow. You got to know all the teachers. You got to know the principals. Your kids had relationships. So it's This is not just a, hey, one day I decided to put my kids there and they were there for 2 years and then we got out of Dodge. It's you were there and enmeshed,
We
right?
were, it was not only the financial investment, because everybody knows that the tuition there is super pricey.
It is
And
extremely expensive. Yep.
when we enrolled our first, I mean, it was less than $10,000 a student. And by the time we enrolled our fourth, we were looking at close to $20,000 per student per year. And in on top of that, our kids participated in athletics, they participated in fine arts, they participated in actually all of our kids at one point or another required supplemental services, whether it be like early intervention for reading or our oldest, he was on an SSP, so he had like a supplemental student plan. And all of those things were additional fees on top of our tuition. So when I think back and I do like a mental calculation of the financial investment that our family made to have our children at that school, it's probably close to $250,000. Like we invest a lot of money for our children to attend Trinity. And up until the very end, our tuition was always paid in full, promptly, and in full. And I think it's also important to note that any financial meetings in all of the years that we were there, they were handled with my husband. I was never a part of them. I never signed enrollment documents. Like that was all his contribution, if you will, to our family. And so I never knew exactly what the dollar amounts were. I never knew what tuition assistance we qualified for. Um, I did, however, find out that my husband was fraudulently altering tax documents and submitting them to the school. And he was on the school's radar for a long time, and nobody mentioned it to me. In fact, at one point, the CFO pulled him aside and said, "What you're doing is very illegal, and you it'll catch up with you and you will get in a lot of trouble. You're looking at like legal trouble if you continue this." But at the end of the day, they were getting the tuition. And so they never,
Yeah.
they,
You'll get in trouble, but not by us.
yes, never turned us away, and they kept collecting. And so, um,
Yeah.
again, like I never had any involvement in any of the financials. My job was to be a mom. I was on campus all the time. I was room mom. I was team mom. I coached. I volunteered all the time in every capacity. I ran galas, which were huge fundraising opportunities. Like I was heavily present and invested in school as far as my time goes. And like I was a present face. All of my children's teachers and I had great relationships. Um, One teacher in particular, Harmony Stickles, she was my son's fourth and sixth grade teacher. She was both of my daughter's sixth grade teacher. So, like, she knew our family. And I remember she was at the early stages of starting her family. And I remember her coming to me all the time and just saying, like, "You're such an amazing mom. You're so hands on. Like, I hope that one day when I have kids, that I can be similar to you and I can be involved in the same capacity that you are." And it's just like those were the relationships that we had. School wasn't just school for us. School was athletics. School was where we went to church. School was where my kids went to school. School was where we spent all of our time. So,
Yep.
yeah,
You knew the culture. You were part of it.
yeah.
Not just part of it. You drank presumably the Kool-Aid, the TCA Kool-Aid. So having been there for so long, I think you are one of the most capable of answering this question. What's the culture like at TCA? You don't have to describe day in, day out everything, but just general cultural stuff from TCA, the interactions with teachers and students, some of the stuff taught. It's a Christian school.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go through the culture at this school.
Um, the culture is, you walk in the doors and it is super friendly, super inviting. Mrs. Cato knows every single parent by name. Like within the first week of school, she is greeting you. Even if it's your first year at the school, first week of school, she's greeting you. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. So and so. How are you? She's shaking hands. She's got that down pat. She knows her audience.
Hmm.
She does a very good job of engaging with all of the kiddos, from the little TKers all the way up to the seniors, and teaching their government classes and their economics classes. And she does share day Friday with the little TKers and kindergartners. So she is present, like she is there every single day, engaging with the students, engaging with the families. I think for us, when our family turned into crisis, Mrs. Caddo wanted to kind of help shepherd us into making big decisions that I don't think she had the right purview to make, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just lines that were crossed that I don't think were very appropriate. In that time, our son now was in 10th grade. And so he was older, and the school is a very small school. He was one of 40, 50 peers in his grade. He was well known. He was well liked. He played multiple sports. He was a dual varsity athlete. Many of the men were his coaches from 5th grade, actually from 3rd grade all the way through 10th grade. And at one point, there was a rumor started about a really well-known coach that he and I were having an affair. And there was no like ground. It was started by my husband. It was started after I had filed for divorce, immediately after, and it spread like wildfire. And these coaches who knew how involved I was as a mom, these teachers like Mrs. Stickles, who knew how hands-on I was as a mom, quickly bought into the narrative that was being spun. And the children at the school, the teenagers, they were sending memes out. They were creating memes, and they would be of this coach and I, or the coaches, it would be a picture of the coach like talking about me and my body. And they were very inappropriate. And I know kids will be kids and they'll do dumb things, but it was never addressed. And it got to the point where my son completely shut down, melted down, and refused to go to school. Like, here his mom is being talked about and exploited in a way that is so inappropriate. And he couldn't. And so he started acting out. And it turned into a situation where we had to pull him from the school. And that was a hard decision. Over the years, there were many times where, because academically he struggled a little bit. He always kept up, but he struggled. But he was the one who needed the most support. And there were times where we thought, this is too hard for him, we're going to take him out. And we were always talked out of it. We were always convinced, no, once you get to the final stretch, like, he will have accomplished so much and he'll be better set for life, and he'll, be able to persevere through really hard things. And at the end of the day, I look back and I just think at how hard they were on him and how much they expected of him, that it ended up breaking his spirit. I kind of got off track because this was about the culture, but the culture was very welcoming and inviting, but also very rigorous. The expectations were very high. The behavior was very militant, and to some degree I appreciated it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there's such a vast range of how kids grow and develop in their personalities, and there was no room for error. And so, particularly once the boys get into junior high school, they call it logic school. And the dean of boys was Mr. Fudge, who I know was mentioned in the previous podcast. And he was just so harsh and critical with the boys. And in one of his first days of junior high, we had a thing happen where Mr. Fudge just berated my son in front of every boy in junior high over something getting bumped off of a desk on accident. And it was such an aggressive and militant just attack without finding out information, without seeing what like really happened. And really it was a very insignificant issue. Like it shouldn't have been a disciplinary issue at all. Nothing broke, nothing was stolen. It just something got bumped off of a desk. And he just berated my son in front of all of his male peers. And anytime my son would try to speak up and say, no, like this is what happened, he would shut him down and cut him off. And he wouldn't even give him the opportunity to speak. And so my son was excused from the room and went into the bathroom and just sobbed hysterically as a 13-year-old little boy. And I remember one of his buddies came in and was just like, dude, that was not cool. Why did he come at you like that? And we ended up going to administration over the incident, and Mr. Fudge was asked to apologize to my son. But from that moment on, he had a target on his back, and he was constantly targeted. He would be standing in a group full of boys who all had their hoods on, and Mr. Fudge would call my son out by name and tell him he had to take his hood off. So it was just like this very unfair treatment of my son from the beginning of him entering upper school. And it made it extra hard for him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that's I didn't ask this or I didn't send this beforehand. I'm curious though. So this is Trinity Classical Academy is part of it's accredited by and a part of the Association for Christian Classical Schools. Um, I'm curious, did you or how aware of the influence or were you aware of Doug Wilson and how the like the accreditation started and where the school comes from? Was that so that was not part of anything that you guys had heard, not part of anything that you guys had ever been told?
I know that sometimes during like PTF meetings, Mrs. Cato would bring up that people were coming for accreditation,
Okay.
and that we wanted the school to be on our best behavior, that everything needed to be tidy and picked up and orderly, and they would be popping in for visits, but we never heard like the outcome of those to
Okay.
my knowledge.
Okay. Gotcha. And then other random question not sent to you previously, but the growing, and you already mentioned one of them, Fudge, the growing relationship between Christ Church Santa Clarita and Trinity Classical Academy being relatively close to each other and having teachers at Trinity Classical Academy, and I think a dean or two, who are also leaders at the local Reformed Church. Were you guys aware of that stuff at all, or was Trinity Classical Academy just its own kind of thing?
I think I can speak for myself.
Yep.
A lot of us knew that there was a big group of staff and faculty who attended Christ
Okay.
Church. But I personally was never invited until way down the road, and we can get to that.
Yep. Yep.
I did attend Christ Church one Sunday as a guest. His name was Chris Chase. And that was probably at the peak point of the crisis in my marriage. So Chris Chase, he again was my son's baseball coach for many, many years. Like we had deep ties with him and his family. They would invite us to dinner. We would invite them to dinner. Like we spent time outside of school. He was in construction. My husband was in construction. So they connected on that. His son was a grade older than my son, but very athletic, loved baseball, loved football, same as my son. And so our lives intertwined a lot inside of school and outside of school.
Got it.
When my marriage went into crisis mode, Chris Chase stepped in like a valiant hero. Like he came in and he said that he was an elder at Christ Church and that he was going to mentor my husband through this and try to like save our marriage basically. And in those few months where it was really dicey, my husband spent a lot of one-on-one time with Chris Chase. There was phone calls that would be hours long in the morning, preventing my husband from working. And then they would go from this phone call to this lunch meeting. And Chris was just like mentoring him through all of this. And at this point, my marriage had become so broken that we were sleeping in the same house, but we were sleeping in separate bedrooms. And I had asked my husband if he would move out of the house because the times that he would come home, it would be very hostile and toxic and uncomfortable. And Chris Chase was adamant that he was the man of the house and he was not to leave the house. And my husband told me repeatedly, I have been advised not to leave this house. And taking it a step further, there was so many conversations where I would be yelled at and be berated by Chris Chase and his wife, and then another coach friend, Mike Paranello and his wife, and they would be screaming at me in these like intervention like settings where they'd come knocking on my door late at night, and Jace, my husband, knew about it. I didn't, and they would all just gather around my living room and just berate me and tell me how I needed to let my husband back in the marital bed. There was one time where one of the guys, it was always the same guys. It was Mike Paranello, Chris Chase, and Keith Haig. And Keith Haig was, you know, you just need to, and I don't want to be explicit, but give your husband oral sex, but
Mm-hmm.
the graphic term, and your marriage will be back to
Oh
normal.
my gosh. Okay.
It was just like, and this one night in particular that this one happened, I became physically ill because they were screaming. Chris was sitting across the living room at one point and then moved like directly in my face and was screaming at me like this rhetoric of how I needed to let my husband in the marital bed. He is the head of this household. I need to submit to him. I need to follow him because he's going to lead our family into, I don't know,
Whatever it is. Yeah.
like this holy marriage that they all hope and wanted for us.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll get into some of this yeah, in just a few minutes. And so you've already touched on this when you started questioning things at Trinity Classical Academy because you like you said when it started off, you're like, wow, Liz like really knows us and knows our names, and this is a really inviting and incredible place. And yeah, it's really hard, but maybe our kids need it for some discipline or for some organization or time management. Like this seems really good for our kids. Um, when did you start having questions? You talked about this a little bit, but maybe more specifically about Liz or specifically about the school itself. When did you start questioning and seeing how things were handled about students or among students or anything like that?
Yeah. I think over the timeline of we were there, you saw families come and go.
Okay.
Heard the rumblings, but I know that they do a very good job of keeping everything hush hush. And that's a big part of their culture. Like they don't want what they would call gossip. They don't want anybody talking about anything that happened down to the kids. Like if something big happened at school and the kids started talking about it amongst themselves, there was significant consequences for them. So over the years, like I said, there was always an ebb of flow of people coming and going. Every couple of years, you'd be shocked because this long-term family abruptly left the school, but you didn't really know why. So up until the last 6 months of us being there, when I personally endured it, I would have said it was the best place ever. And it's exactly where I wanted to be. I wanted my kids to be. In fact, so much so that in our divorce proceedings, I filed for divorce November of 2021. By February of 2022, we had a stipulation in place. And part of our stipulation, the biggest part of our stipulation, was that our children would remain at Trinity Classical Academy until the completion of 12th grade. Like we stipulated that in our divorce decree, and it was signed by a judge. It was signed by both parties. Like, that was something that we came together and agreed on. Like, it was important for our kids to remain in that place, because I still find myself saying, like, it was my children's safe place. But those last, I don't even want to say 6 months, 4 months is when the blinders were removed and I saw it for what it was. And it was just like one event after the next, after the next, after the next. And if you want me to go down that, I can. Um,
If you want to give like a short little summary, and then we'll move to
yeah.
the next thing with Liz. But yeah, a short little summary for what some of those things were, as
Yeah.
much as you're comfortable sharing.
So when COVID happened, Mrs. Cato did not want to shut down the school. She shut down the school initially and then reopened it as soon as she could for the little ones as a camp. It was, and I thought it was the best thing ever. I wanted my kids to go to school. I wanted them to be on campus. And
Yep.
so,
Yep.
but because of all of the crazy rules the government was implementing, if there was an exposure, if someone in the household tested positive,
Yeah.
uh, people were having to leave on a moment's notice and be gone for 2 weeks at a time. And so there was I want to say it was a school wide email that went out that they needed proctors, and it was for all the grades. And very few people spoke up and said, I'll do it. But I was one of them. So that whole school year post COVID, I proctored almost every single day in every single grade. Like, some days I would be in kindergarten and TK for 2 weeks, and then I would be in 12th grade for 2 weeks. And it was wherever there was a need for a body, an adult body, like me and maybe three other moms would do it. And that was also when my marriage started to fall apart. So that school year, I did that free of, like, no, I would never received a paycheck, but I was on campus every school day, the entire school day, just proctoring these kids. It was volunteer. The following school year, when I knew I needed some source of income, I had applied at the school, and I'd been a stay-at-home mom for 17 years, so I'd never had any income. But my marriage was in duress, and so I had applied at the school, and I got hired as like an on-call substitute. And so I worked most days that school year, but I was receiving a paycheck for my time. And then the next year, Mrs. Cato actually approached me and gave me the idea to spend the summer getting licensed in behavioral therapy
Hmm.
and work in the Imago Day School. I was working for another, I followed her lead. I applied at this company. I spent the whole summer training and obtaining certificates. And then I Mrs. Cato talked to my supervisor and had me placed in the Imago Day School. So I was a one-on-one behavioral interventionist with a couple of kiddos on campus, and I worked every single day on campus, but I was not paid from Trinity. I was paid from my outside company. I was just like a contract employee, if that makes sense. So that worked out until after Christmas break, and things were getting rough in my divorce proceedings. And my husband's behavior was erratic, and Mrs. Cato and I would walk sometimes, and she would say things to me like, if you leave your husband, all of this goes away. Kids will not be able to attend private school. You'll not be able to drive the fancy car you drive. You won't live in the big, beautiful house that you have. And I kept saying to her, like, he's having relationships outside of our marriage. He's not coming home at night. He's withholding financial resources so that I can't even put gas in my car or buy groceries for my kids. And she just kept encouraging me to pursue the marriage. And at one point, she put us in contact with a pastor who is also a licensed psychologist out here. And she like heavy press that my husband and I go to this counselor. And we met with him, and it was a 3-hour session. And he met with us together, and then he met with us each individually, and then he brought us back together. And after he brought us back together, he brought up some concerns that he had heard from both sides. And my husband got irate. And in that session, he threw a chair at me. And I was
Your
crying.
husband who threw a chair at you?
Yes, my husband threw a chair at me and I was crying. And he stormed out of the meeting and left. And I was sitting there just completely in shock. And this man who pastors, like, his his role in the church is to give therapy services to pastors because pastors take on a lot and
Mhm.
they're constantly counseling other people. So, like, what I'm trying to say is that he is a man of God and someone who believes in marriage and wants more than anything to save a marriage. But he looked at me and he said, "You are in a domestic violence situation and you need to get out."
Hmm.
And the next time I met with Liz, I had told her about that and she just kind of snubbed it off. And so meanwhile, in our court order, it was also ordered that my husband was going to be the financial responsible party for our children's tuition. And he signed and agreed to that. And one of the things he did was abruptly stop paying their tuition.
Hmm.
And so that school year, the 2022-2023 school year, I took every penny I had, which wasn't much. And I was able to scrape together $10,020 in tuition. And I paid it. And um, we were approaching spring break, and tuition hadn't been paid in a while. And they were sending us letters like, if you don't pay tuition, your kids are not going to be allowed to return after spring break. And so I was frantic, and they set up a financial meeting with my husband and I, and we were supposed to meet on April 26th at 2 p.m. And that was when thesis presentations were taking place. And they um, they sent the meeting like invite to both of us, and we that day my daughter had gotten a concussion at school and my little guy had an appointment down at Children's Hospital, so it was a crazy day. We were spread real thin, but I was doing it all. And so I got the call while I was leaving Children's that my daughter was in the nurse's office, and so I was like, I'm trying to get back, give me a few, like, I'll be a half hour and I'll be back. And so I got there and they couldn't find her on campus. And I they were walkie talkieing everybody and they're like, where's so and so, and we couldn't find her. So I went upstairs to the thesis presentations, and the thesis presentations are a big to do. They're videoed, they're live streamed on YouTube. The celebration center is packed. People are standing in there to watch
Yep.
them. And,
That's as of this recording, they're in the middle of their thesis presentations right now.
mm-hmm. So if you go on YouTube on any given night, you can you can watch the live streams,
Yep.
and there's camera angles from every corner of the um, of every corner of the celebration center.
Yep.
And um, I I walked into the celebrations, or I walked up to the celebration center, and while a presenter is presenting, the doors are locked. You can't go in or out. And so I waited for the doors to open. And when they opened, I scanned the entire room and I didn't see my daughter. And Mrs. Cato was sitting in the back. And I said, "Hi, have you seen my daughter?" And she's like, "No, I haven't seen her. Is she supposed to be in class? Is she supposed to be here?" And I said, "No, she, I guess, got a concussion earlier today. She was in the nurse's office and now they can't find her." And she's like, "Okay, let me take a look." So I go back downstairs and I'm doing some more inquiries on where she could be checking the bathrooms. And I get a text from Mrs. Cato, and she texts me and she says, "I have eyes on her. She's sitting with her dad." And I was like, interesting. And so I go back upstairs. The doors are again locked because there's a presenter. And so I wait for the doors to open and I walk in, and my daughter was sitting with her dad and sitting with Kim and Keith Haig, which were some of his best friends. And their daughter was to present that day. And so I tapped on my daughter's shoulder. I said, "Come on, let's get going." And I whispered to my husband. I was not loud, I was very quiet. I said, "There's a tuition meeting today at 2. That's really important. I need you to be there." And Kim Haig lunged from 2 rows ahead and screamed profanities. Get the F out of here. You are not effing welcome. And she's storming through the chairs and she grabs a hold of my backside and starts shoving me down the aisles while screaming in front of all of these people. And she grabs my daughter by the bicep and starts yanking her down the aisle. And my daughter is sobbing hysterically. And she has me in one hand and she has my daughter in the other hand. And she's forcefully and aggressively pushing us towards the back of the celebration center. And I said, I don't want you touching my body. Please let go of me and let go of my daughter. And she wouldn't. And she just screamed and berated us and shoved us out the doors. And so my daughter was hysterical. And Mrs. Cato saw the whole thing, and Mrs. Cato follows us out. I should also add in here, this is a very important factor. The Haig family they're extremely wealthy. They have trust funds from both sides. They donate large amounts. They pay full tuition. Like they're a family that would be protected, if you will. And so she, Mrs. Cato approaches me and she's like, what the heck was that? What are you doing? Get outside. And she like pulls my daughter and I out to the outdoor platform and she's like, why do you think you can behave like that? And I was like, I didn't do anything. I just came to grab my daughter. And then she starts questioning my daughter, and my daughter's agreeing with everything I say while sobbing. And she dismisses us and we leave. And so I took my daughter home and I came back for that 2:00 appointment. As I'm walking in, my husband's walking out with his mistress and the Haig family, and Mrs. Cato's behind them, and she's like, get in my office. And so I duck into her office. She escorts them all out. My husband doesn't come to the tuition meeting. And I sit there for an hour and just get absolutely obliterated by Mrs. Cato for what happened upstairs. I asked her to review the footage because I knew that it was being recorded. I'm like, if you want to know what happened, like, just go back and watch it. And she refused. And so during that meeting, we focused a lot on the altercation that happened upstairs. And then when we did dabble into the tuition, she was just like, who here at this school loves your kids? Who, loves your kids to make a direct donation to their tuition so that they can return after spring break? And I wouldn't name any names. And so she started naming the Chase family, the Haig family, the Visconti family, the Parinello family. And she's naming all these families. And I'm like, I don't understand where you're going with this. And she said, I'm going to ask them on your behalf for a donation. And she did. She left that meeting and she asked them, and none of them donated on my children's behalf, but a family did eventually donate $3,000. And that was what allowed my children to stay the remainder of that school year. But from that point on, I was banned from campus. I was not allowed to be on campus. And my children were not allowed to participate in any of the end of the school year activities. So I had to tell my 8-year-old that he could not do the Trinity Olympics on the last day of school. My daughter couldn't go to the athletic banquet after participating in 2 varsity athletic programs that school year. They completely pigeonholed my kids for their dad's behavior and Mrs. Haig's behavior. I had multiple families and faculty and staff members send me messages, text me, emails, asking me if I was okay, saying that they saw what happened and that they would be willing to speak up on my behalf. And Mrs. Cato shut that all down immediately. She intercepted them. She threatened parents with their children not graduating, which was a few days later. She threatened faculty and staff if they were to say anything, their jobs were at stake. It was like immediately shut down. And the video of that small section of time just disappeared into the abyss. I did file a order of protection against Mrs. Haig, and I was granted a temporary restraining order, and we were to appear in court over it. And on the day of court, Mrs. Haig and my husband, unbeknownst to me, pulled my daughter out of school in her Trinity uniform, and they showed up at the courthouse in Van Nuys, and they were asking her to testify against me in a court of law. And I feel like in that moment, I had a decision to either protect myself or to protect my daughter. And I made the decision to protect my daughter and drop all charges so that my daughter didn't have to stand before a judge and testify either against her best friend's mom or her own mom. And so I dropped the charges, and the whole case was dismissed.
Yeah,
So
that's a lot, and I know there's more.
yeah.
Uh, but that's yeah. Anything else that you want to share, or if you want to move on to the next day, we can as well.
No, I just feel like, in summary, like after I was granted a temporary restraining order by the court based on presenting compelling evidence, Mrs. Caddo worked to systematically cover up the abuse of the incident. She pressured witnesses not to testify, threatening to remove their children from the school community. And she got rid of the video data that we all know is like I said, those theses are happening right now, and they're heavily recorded. They're broadcasted live and after the fact. And it's just the fact that it mysteriously disappeared is it's telling. Like in retrospect, it was part of her campaign to cover up the abuse, to silence me, and it just everything about the whole situation was gross and unfair and awful, and my kids took the brunt of it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that stuff. I know it's not fun, and I know it's not something you relish in doing. It's just something that you feel is important to be out there for people to know that this is what happens when you go against the system.
It is, yeah.
Um, so I'll ask sort of two questions in one. And you've talked about Liz and how she quote unquote counseled you during your marriage troubles, or I guess sent you to a counselor and didn't really listen and didn't really care because it seems like I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like her number one priority was money in the bank. It's as long as we got families paying for kids to come to school, then she's doing her job.
Right.
Um, so knowing it sounds pretty explicitly she knew what was going on in your marriage. Um, so I mean it kind of like leads me to ask this question. We've asked this for many other women who come on this series. Um, yeah, it's two questions in one. Why did they treat you like this and not your husband, whom is the perpetrator of all of this stuff? So like why does he seemingly like get scot-free and you take the fall for everything that happens?
I have wrestled with that question a lot. I think what it boils down to is Mrs. Caddo needed to protect the affluent community at Trinity because those are the dollar signs that come in and sustain Trinity. And so she will turn a blind eye to the abuse, and she will silence people who are willing to speak up. I had two people who wrote witness statements to something that they observed at the hands of my husband, and it directly impacted my youngest son. And when Mrs. Caddo found out about the statements that were written, she immediately silenced them. She threatened employment. She said that they were never allowed to write anything on my behalf again. And all these people were trying to do was protect my children. And she shut it all down. I remember over the years, I had mentioned my son was super athletic, and a lot of these men were his coaches, and particularly Joe Visconti, another affluent family from the school. He coached football, he coached baseball, and he has a temper like no one you've ever seen. He gets irate, and were several instances where he would scream profanities at players, opposing coaches, referees, and umpires. I remember there was an altercation between him and another dad from the opposing team in the parking lot after a championship game, and there was never any repercussions. He continued to coach. I believe to this day he continues to coach. I was a softball coach at the school, and I did my job well. I was well liked by the families, by the players. I put in unimaginable time and energy and effort into being the best coach. And one of my players was a daughter of another affluent family, and a family that really supported my husband, especially during the crisis period of our marriage. It was a husband and wife who sat on my couch and obliterated me for filing for divorce, for living in sin because I filed for divorce. This family, the wife in particular, Mrs. Parinello, she ran with the narrative that I was having an affair with a different coach on campus, and she questioned me about it. She came to me and asked me if I was having an affair, and I looked her square in the eye and was like, no, absolutely not. And then she went further and said, is it even an emotional affair? And confession is the best way. And I just repeatedly, no, 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 because that's not of my character. I would never be unfaithful in my marriage. I would never even consider it. I would never do it. I don't care what their circumstances were. I would never step out of my marriage. And she would just grind me on the topic. And I would be to the point where I was in tears and deny it and deny it and deny it. And I didn't know how else to convey that it was a rumor started by my husband out of revenge, and there was no truth behind it. And she continued to pursue a relationship with my husband, and her husband continued to pursue a relationship with my husband, a friendship relationship with my husband. And they actually hired my husband and paid him under the table to do work in their home, to do construction work in their home. And I remember being so upset because my kids were on the verge of getting kicked out. And yet I was still showing up every single day for their daughter who played on my softball team and coaching her and loving on her, just like I loved on every single player on that team. And I remember seeing my husband and Jessica Parinello talking, and they were talking about construction in her home. And I walked off the softball field and I looked at her talking to my husband, and I said, way to continue to support the abuser. Because in that time, his biggest weapon against me was financial and economic abuse. And he was not giving me any money for anything, let alone paying our children's tuition. And she had me removed as a coach from the softball team. That was my last game that I coached for that team, and I wasn't allowed to coach anymore for that one small comment. But people like the Viscontis and the Parinellos and the Higgs, they're immune. They have an immunity. They don't get in trouble for their behaviors. They don't get chastised for screaming and cursing and presenting in such a manner that is so just, it's a poor reflection of the school. It's not what our school pillars stand on. It's not what Mrs. Cato preaches from the pulpit. The behaviors are, they're gross. They're out of control and lack self-control. But there's no repercussion for those people. My husband was having multiple affairs, and I came to these people and told them, and I didn't find out about them until after I had filed for divorce. Then everything suddenly comes to light. Like when I found out that my best friend Kim Haig was having an affair with my husband in 2017. And I was completely left out of all of those conversations. Kim and her husband got to go to therapy, and they got to have this whole restorative period of time where they were able to fix their marriage, and they left me in the dark. And this was my best friend at the time. They left me in the dark, and I only found out years and years and years later. And so going back to your original question, I think that these people of the Trinity community treated me the way that they did for a couple of reasons. One, I think there's so many skeletons in their closets that they don't want exposed. They all have adultery and affairs and just these sinful things that they've participated in, and they don't want them exposed. And so together, they have just completely alienated me and isolated me and cut me out of their lives. And here's the thing, I am better off for it. I don't want to be associated with those kind of people anymore in my life. And I have such a great peace now that those people are not in my life anymore. As far as Trinity goes, they had to keep relationship with these people because those are their financial supporters and donors. Those are the people that are paying full tuition. They're not on tuition assistance, and they're donating big every single year. And so those donations give them immunity and pacify Trinity from allowing them to have any repercussions towards them. They're allowed to behave in whatever manner they want to behave in and get away with it. And because I was of no use to the school anymore, I was the easy target. I was the one that they could get rid of, if you will, as a coach, as an educational interventionist, as a Trinity parent, family member, staff member, whatever you want to call me. It was easy for them to just throw me out of the picture. And it's really sad because, like I said, all of that negatively impacted my children in such a big way. The leadership and administration at Trinity had the ability to come to my defense, even if it meant us not returning the following year. They had the legal documents. They had the knowledge of what was taking place. They had the ability to do the right thing and to stop the cycle of abuse. Liz Caddo put a barrier in everybody who tried's way and did not let that happen.
The accountability is like they have the court order in hand that states that he was the financial responsibility. And we actually went to court just a few days ago, last Friday. And I brought up the tuition again because there's still an outstanding debt of $26,000. And he owes me the $10,000 that I came out of pocket and paid. And there's a new court order as of last Friday that states that he needs to pay back Trinity the $26,000, and he needs to pay me back the $10,000 and change that I paid. And I emailed Liz and a couple other people in the financial department, and I said, just so you have it for your records, here's the newest court order. And I got no response. I feel like from day one, I've done my due diligence to be a good person and to be a good mom and to do the right thing. And even to this day, I find myself still fighting for the right thing to happen, the right outcome, because I know that my kids did attend that school. We owe the tuition. Mm-hmm. I just don't know why they don't hold him accountable.
Yeah, and they have the document in hand that holds him accountable legally.
But they only came after me. I was the one called into these meetings. I was the one screamed at. You know, even when I look at those in-home interventions. Those were separate from campus, but there was one where Mr. and Mrs. Caddo came, and they were counseling both of us for sure. And in those meetings, like, I was always made to feel this small and so insignificant, and I was always made to feel like I was making a sinful decision that was going to destroy my family by filing for divorce and trying to get out of an abusive marriage,
Even though they knew what was going on in your marriage.
even though they knew what was going on in my marriage.
Okay.
Going on those walks with Mrs. Cato, I told her, like, my husband didn't come home last night.
Yeah.
He just didn't come home. And then he came home to shower like at 10 o'clock this morning, and then he left again. And there were families and businesses in our Trinity community that my husband was contracted with and doing work for, and he just abandoned their jobs. And that was brought before the school, and nobody said or did anything. They knew that my car was on the verge of being repossessed because he just stopped making the payment. And they knew what I was making working at Trinity. I was making just over minimum wage. I couldn't pay tuition. I couldn't pay my mortgage. I couldn't pay the car payment and all the expenses that my husband had paid and provided for 17 years. Yet they came after me. And I'm talking all of these friends too, all of these people, all of these coaches and teachers who like witnessed our life over the 11 years we were at Trinity, and what his role was in the family versus what my role is in the family. And all of them were so quick to come to his defense because I filed for divorce.
So he, even though it doesn't sound like he tried to fight for the marriage at all, it's because you brought the divorce papers that you are the villain in this story, even if, or I guess even against um him being the one who in all reality was sitting against you and doing everything else, but at least he didn't bring the divorce papers.
Yeah.
So he's good.
And he cried to Chris Chase, I can't believe she's leaving me. I don't understand. She just snapped. I was accused of having a midlife crisis. I was accused of having affairs. I was accused of all of the things. And they all ran with the narrative. And at the end of the day, he was accusing me of everything that he was doing.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah. That's what it sounds like. And I'm not sure how much you've listened to Sons of Patriarchy uh or the episodes, but um and this is why I asked about Doug Wilson and Christchurch and their links, but your story at Trinity Classical Academy is every other woman's story at any one of these churches that is connected with a Trinity Classical or is connected with a Christchurch or is the same denomination or the same affiliation. It's because a woman brought divorce papers because she was being abused in some way, shape, or form, and the church came around the man because the man didn't bring it, and the man either supposedly wants to work on it or is like she's crazy, and then they just believed him because he's a man and you're a woman, and that makes his word better, I guess. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
so yeah, that's last question. Then anything you want to add? Um, what would you like to, because as you know, and I'll let the listeners in on this. I emailed um, a large number of current and former TCA families. Um, and you were one of those that responded and saying, "Hey, I have a story that's very similar to the woman's whom you interviewed from Christchurch." And so we know they're going to listen to this. And we know that they're listening to it right now. We know the turmoil that's happening at TCA right now. We are aware of all that stuff. So if there are TCA people listening, we know what's going on at your school, and we know what's going on at Christchurch, and we know what you guys are covering up. We know there are more stories than just yours. There are many more stories than just yours, and we'll be going through every single one of them. Um, So what would you like to tell those who are listening from TCA when you were the one who was silenced and you were the one who was accused and abused? What would you like to tell those at TCA and tell other people about TCA, about their culture and their headmaster?
First, I want to backtrack a little tiny
Sure,
bit.
go for it.
There are some really good people at
Oh,
TCA.
of course. Yep.
Like some of the most amazing human beings I've ever met in my entire life who
Hmm.
pour into my life and pour into my children's life, and check on them and rally around them. Like there are angels
Hmm.
working at school. And
We know some of them. Yep, of course. We know some of them.
I'll never forget there was a TA who had heard about what was going on and about the stipulations that were put in place by Mrs. Cato at the end of the school year towards my children. My children were not allowed to participate in the Trinity Olympics, which was the most anticipated accumulation of the school year. It was this huge all-day event where the kids just got to play and have fun. And Mrs. Cato didn't make or lose money if my kids participated, but she still would not let my little guy participate. And I remember this TA saying, over my dead body, am I going to look that little boy in his eyes and tell him, no, he can't participate. He has to sit out. Not after his full year of hard work and dedication to our classroom am I going to do that to him. She was willing to go to war on my son's behalf. Those are the amazing people who are the hands and feet of Jesus, serving a community of faith and teaching and enriching the young minds at Trinity Classical Academy. But at the top, at the administrative level and leadership level, there is corruption. And I'm not saying everybody, but Mrs. Cato has a well-oiled machine on how to silence people and how to sweep under the rug big things for the betterment of the outsider's perspective of her community. She wants it to look prestigious and shiny and all good things. And if you're a family who is wealthy or a big donor, or if you're a leader on campus, you're immune from any sort of repercussion or consequence of bad behavior. It is obvious that Mrs. Cato covered up real abuse instead of helping or even reporting it. At Trinity Classical Academy, wealth buys you immunity. And the administration and the leaderships, they are continuing to allow these cycles of abuse to occur.
there was a shift in the motivation of the school, and it happened when Trinity bought the North Park building. And they used to vet their incoming families. I mean, so heavily. I know people who were turned away because they didn't agree with their lifestyle or um, lifestyle choices. And the culture just completely shifted and it became 100% about the dollar sign and not about the kids. It became about the statistics. It became about who was getting a military academy invite. And that family might not have to pay full tuition because that's going to look on their stats. That's going to look good on their stats as a school. We send kids off to the military academy every single year. So that student who's going off to the military academy can get wasted in the parking lot before school, give alcohol to other students at school, and there's not going to be any repercussions because they already have the military academy acceptance. And for families who have a lot of money, a blind eye is turned in over everything. You can get away with just about anything. And we saw that time after time after time after time. It makes me sad. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart for the kids. My kids knew nothing other than Trinity as far as athletics, as far as school, church, like their whole world was at that school, and that was ripped out from underneath them. And at the end of the day, because we owed tuition, we would have graciously walked away from the school. I wouldn't have reapplied to come back the next year without having my financial orders in place. But the way they treated my children at the end, and the way they had a scarlet letter written on their backs for something that their dad did, and the school knew that. Everybody in the financial department, administration department, they all knew that this was their dad's doing, and they still treated my children terribly. And we were a dedicated family for a long, long time. So it just, it makes me really sad. It's not the place that they put out there that it is. It's not a school that's focused on wisdom, purpose, courage, virtue, their little pillars. It's not. It's dollar signs. That's what matters.
All right. Anything else that you want to leave? Anything either I didn't mention or you feel you want to mention, or if not, we can end it here.
No, I just appreciate you pursuing this, and I hope that it just brings light to a sinful nature, just a yucky thing that's occurring in what should be a Christ centered, God filled, safe environment for little kiddos.